Hello, everybody. Um, if you're in any way a regular follower of mine, you will be aware that I have not done one of these autobiographical podcasts for a long time. The one I did last was an opinion piece. It was too echoey and whatever. Now I'm not a techie, and I don't know how far I've gotten. The highest number I could find was 27, so this may be number 28 or perhaps higher. Sorry, this is going to be difficult to put in chronological order if anyone ever wants to, but there it is. So last time I said I was on my way to Japan, but I want to briefly maybe repeat and maybe give some new information about what happened before that. So I was living in a trailer, actually half a trailer. Somebody's stuff occupied the other half. And it was right next to the Sausalito houseboats, which were a crazy scene. And yes, I'd just gotten back from Belize, and I was really having some reverse culture shock issues. I did not feel at home in the United States at that time. I really wanted to go back, actually, but I don't know if I was very clear why. Anyway, I was alienated, which was perfect for what was going to happen in my life next. So I was in high school at Tamalpais High School in Mill Valley, right next to Sausalito. I was in one of the 3 semesters of high school, I think, that I actually completed. And I was in a special program called SSI, not the money that you get from the government every month if you're lucky or disabled or both, but that's what the program was called. And it was basically geared towards odd kids who are also smart. And that fit me. But I also had some problems. So I wound up going to another class like once a day, I think. And basically that class was for the stupid kids. And I had my problems because of my learning disabilities. I was smart in some areas, stupid in others. Now it's called, what's it called? 2E, which means twice exceptional. Exceptionally smart in some areas, exceptionally the opposite of smart in others. But they didn't have that kind of terminology. And later, this class was for dumb kids. It was for stupid kids. There was no way around it. Those kids were, they were nice enough mostly, but they were kind of on the dense side, sadly. And that's not their fault, but that's just the way it was. No names mentioned because I don't even remember them, but mostly. Yeah, my mom later said that we were that they put you in the smart kids program and the stupid kids program at the same time, which literally wasn't dealing with the problem, but they didn't know. What can you do? And now it's probably not any better, even though they know because of budget cuts and God knows what all conservative government and so forth. And so there I was, and my situation in my trailer was actually pretty nice. I had a little hot plate. I had a styrofoam ice chest, and my father lived nearby, so I could schnorr a little food off him. He lived on one of the houseboats, maybe 2 of them during that time period. I think just one. But it was infested with fleas, so I didn't want to live there anyhow. They didn't bite him, but they bit me. And I learned about the punks. And so there was a big flea market nearby in Marin City. So I learned, I got a record player, a hot plate, an ice chest, and some records. And I had a little bed and I had some records. And so I met a punk rock kid, a woman, a young girl, really, 16, like me, in SSI. And she basically turned me on to the whole scene. And I was like, wow, another weird subculture. I miss, a lot of people my age who are misfits were basically of the mind that we had missed the big party in the 60s. I was actually there, but I was like 4, and it's not really the same when you are, prepubescent and so forth. So it wasn't the same. Yeah, I basically had missed the party because I was a little kid when I was there. And so we wanted our own countercultural movement. And we created one, and it was different from the hippies in some ways and more similar than we cared to admit in others. So I met her. I started buying some records. So I bought Patti Smith and the Dead Boys and what else? Some others. And so I found which club to go to in San Francisco, and I started going there. At that time, it was the Mabuhay Gardens. Later, the Deaf Club, but that would be like in '79 or something. So it was still the Mabuhay, which was still young and fresh at the time, as was I. So a couple of experiences I had there. One was well, there was a woman I've been calling Maria, who I knew, who also started going. She went to everything. She did hippie stuff. She did, discos, and she did the punk scene. She just went anywhere where there was a party of any sort. So she went to some of the punk scenes. She had a boyfriend there whom I also knew and was friends with. So I was there once, and she was involved in the situation I was in when I was 14, which involved 3 women at once, and that was described in an earlier video. So one night I went there, and I met her, and she was with a friend of hers, female, as well as his boyfriend. And so some way or other, she started making out with me. We started making out. And then her girlfriend said, "You're doing this with a child," and that stopped it. Well, 16, some people might say I was a child. I wasn't as much of a child as I had been 2 years ago when I made out with her and a couple of other women and went a little further than that. But that night, this other woman, well, she didn't cock block me because it probably wouldn't have gone that far, but she tongue blocked me at the very least. And I was mad. I had been enjoying myself, so I was mad, but I had my revenge because not long after that, she was sitting by us, the girlfriend, she started making out with her boyfriend, who was kind of cute, a little older than me, and I knew they could hear me. I made the most obnoxious sinus clearing, throat clearing, all at once, spitting noise that I could manage as loudly as possible so that I could ruin the moment for them as she had for me. So, I got her back for that one. So, another thing I'd like to mention. Of course, there were early San Francisco and other places punk bands on the stage, which were interesting. But I'll talk about that more later. But there was a performance group called, God, I don't remember what they were called, but the guy who was at the center of it was named Frank Moore. And he later went on, he was a severely disabled guy. He had cerebral palsy, if I remember correctly. and he was famous. He later became famous as a sort of performance artist slash shaman slash host of events that were, as he put it, sensual, not sexual, which means you could fool around, but you wouldn't actually, do any kind of penetrative sex. He drew the line there. But at this point, he belonged to another group, which was just theater. It was all for fun and yucks, and it was very much shock oriented, which fit to play at the Mabuhay Gardens. It was very weird, intentionally so, and so Frank Moore had cerebral palsy. He was in a wheelchair. He could not talk clearly. He could not walk. He could not control his body very well. And apparently he couldn't have intercourse either. He made the best of it, but he talked about that. And so he communicated with a headband with a toy arrow connected to it and a Ouija board, and he would touch different letters on the Ouija board and spell out the words. That's how he communicated. So he was part of this, he was part of this performance group, and so was his wife at the time. And people who saw it and saw him in it, and someone else mentioned this, they might think, is that disabled guy even aware of what's going on? Is he being exploited? Well, this is a little weird. What's going on with this? He was very much aware. He was very much informed. He was very much part of it. And he was, in fact, the major organizer of it. With the help of his wife. I don't know exactly what process they used, but he organized this and later his own shamanic performances, as he called them. And so one I distinctly remember is that Frank Moore was in a set which was meant to be a hospital room, and there was somebody playing a nurse there, and a couple other people who were, I guess, supposed to be his friends or family, and then they left. And then the nurse started doing various ways, abusing him. I guess kind of torturing him while he made incoherent noises, clearly indicating fear and pain. And the last part of it was that she gave him an enema. And when you're seeing this done in real time to a guy who really is disabled, and you're not sure who wrote it, this seems to be pushing the boundaries of taste a little bit. Although I actually did think it was funny in a weird way. Later, I learned that Frank Moore had written about it. And now that I've been in the hospital myself and saw how unpleasant it can be, it usually is if you're there for more than one night, at least. And knowing that he was disabled for his entire life, I think this was Frank Moore working through some of his own hospital-based traumas, because hospital stays can really cause trauma. I think that major hospital stays should be followed by therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder, frankly. Anyway, that was the process then. That was his process. And now it's time to, and my mother and stepfather were already in Japan. Just a little technical business I forgot to mention. So my videos are scattered over like 3 different channels, and some of them I can't find. I don't know. I hope they haven't been erased. I hope they still exist. And I don't know how many of them I made, and I was numbering them. The highest I got to was 27. So maybe this is 28, but it might be higher. Sorry. I lost track. Yeah. But I said I was finally going to move on to Japan, so I will. My stepfather was working as a civilian, but as a doctor in an army base in Japan. And my mom was with him. And my brother, who, being 9 years younger than me, must have been what, about 8? Just the right age to annoy me. And because when he was a little kid, mostly I thought he was pretty cute, even though he was annoying. But you know, he was coming into his own self. And one of the things that was notable about that time period, although I did have some conflicts with my parents, mostly they were sympathetic to me and vice versa. I wasn't that rebellious against them. And I think that's because on the army base, particularly, we were somewhat in solidarity because we were weirdos among straight people. And so we had a little bit of weirdo solidarity going. For example, there was a major anti-drug campaign at the on the army base. And I was into this and that. And my mother and stepfather were too, mostly into cannabis, you know. They had some pills around though. And what else? Yeah. So we were all, you know, very uncomfortable with this anti-drug campaign that was launched at my school and in general. And in the newspaper, the Army newspaper, Stars and Stripes, my mom tried to get an editorial anonymously published about it, but of course it was not published. So there was this guy, Dr. Gold, that was really kind of McCarthy style because he said, there's a drug problem in this city, on this base, and I have a list right here of people who are abusing drugs. And he probably didn't, so it was just McCarthy. Joseph McCarthy was the guy who would say, I have a list of all the communists who are in Congress or in the movie industry or in the military, but you never saw the list. So everyone was on edge. Well, that was true here. And this army base was really like a conservative small town, American town in the middle of Japan. There were tract housing, there were lawns, there were red, white, and blue mailboxes on the corners, and it was like some 1950s small town in a way. But there actually was a drug problem on the campus. And not just in my family, which definitely had it. And I can speak of it now because they're dead. My mother and stepfather are dead. So they didn't want me to talk about it while I was alive, especially my mom. But can't go after them now because they're dead. So I'm going to say what I want, which is the truth mostly. And so other kids were drinking a lot, mostly, but also taking pills, what they could get. One of the things they could get was called Optilodon, which I tried. It was a ridiculous drug, really. It was just ephedrine that was still available in sinus inhalers at the time. There weren't that many people making meth out of it then, so it wasn't really regulated. It was the precursor of amphetamines, including meth, ephedrine, or Sudafed, but this was ephedrine. But it wasn't amphetamine yet, and it gave you a little energy and a lot of the jitters. You know, most real drug addicts or users, sophisticated drug users, and speed freaks didn't mess with this stuff, except maybe to make meth out of if they knew how. But anyway, I tried it once, didn't care for it. And then there was another pill which I never tried. I probably would have, which someone had given if someone had given it to me. Apparently, it was a low dose barbiturate. Being low dose, nevertheless, one kid who had never taken it before, and I could say that's stupid, but I found out later that William S. Burroughs, who was very intelligent, at about the same age, at 15, took an overdose of chloral hydrate, which he'd never taken before. That's a downer. Well, this stuff was also a downer. And this kid, who was maybe 15, 16, took about 15 or 16 of them and overdosed, but he survived. And sometimes they'd get a hold of a little weed or a little hash or alcohol or a Darvon or a Percodan, which someone gave me once just to see what I would act like when I was on it. So there was that happening. And so I either bummed drugs from my parents or I got them off the black market or legally if it was alcohol. They also had absinthe. So Japan, not too dissimilarly from a lot of the USA at that time, but unlike the army base. So Japan really didn't enforce age of, I don't know what age their drinking was officially allowed, but they weren't enforcing it. They weren't really enforcing it around sex either, but there's some other reasons behind that. But so anyway, I could go into a liquor store there and buy alcohol, or I could get my parents to buy it from me at the PX, their grocery store, their supermarket, which was a lot cheaper, subsidized, certainly probably cheaper than groceries in the US, and definitely cheaper than groceries in Japan. So they also had absinthe, which later became popular in San Francisco. It's illegal in the US and much of the West. It was very popular in the 19th century. The decadent poets loved it, And basically it was a mix of alcohol and wormwood, which is a deliriant, like in the belladonna family. And the way you were supposed to drink it was out of with a special tool, which you would put it would start out green, and you would put a sugar cube over it and pour it through this tool, and it would add hot water and sugar, and it would turn from a bright green to a milky kind of greenish white, and then you would drink it. I never drank it in that form. But I did drink it what you could get in Japan. I just drank it out of the bottle. Some people said it had opium in it. Some people said that two-fisted drinkers who are used to drinking a lot, kind of OD'd or overdosed from drinking a lot of this stuff. Finally, I looked it up much later, and it turned out that it did have wormwood in it. I didn't know if it was the real thing or not, and it was kind of in between. It had real wormwood in it, but not very much of it. So if you drank a little, you probably wouldn't get very much wormwood. I got a little of a buzz, but I don't know if it was a placebo or not. So that was that. And I would steal stuff like codeine and Valium from my parents. Well, mostly just codeine. I wasn't so into Valium at the time. I would steal codeine, and on one occasion they gave me Dexedrine. And they gave me alcohol. And I got to smoke weed with them sometimes. So there's all that. And I scored half a gram of hash from another student and then lost it. And I smoked weed with others too. So enough about the drugs. There were actually other interesting things happening in Japan besides the intoxicant that I managed to get or didn't get. So this was 1978, and this was during the Japanese bubble period, which meant that people had a lot of money. Prices were high, but regardless, they made enough money to make up for it if they were working for the Japanese economy, which most people on the army base were not. They were working for dollars, American dollars from the army base. But fortunately, they had their food. Their rent was available. I think our housing was actually free, as a matter of fact. And it was like a regular, like suburban 2-bedroom, 1-story house. So not a bad deal altogether, with a little front lawn and stuff off the base was pretty expensive. Now, I did have one job off the Japanese economy, which was tutoring ESL. They let me have two of the students were like in their early teens, and one of them was 16. Eventually, the 16-year-old decided to leave my group and join the adult group. And that's entirely my fault. I might get to that later. But she was 16, so as was I. So you can get the general drift. Why that might have happened. And so, yeah, they each paid me $5, which means I made $15 a week at my peak, and $10 after I messed up and lost one of my students. And so my parents, that was good. I mean, I enjoyed it. I got to learn ESL. And my younger brother used to attend, but my parents kicked him out because he was getting smart mouth with me, which wasn't the only problem. The main problem was he was interfering with my ability to tutor these students. And so he got kicked out and he had to go to his room and he was crying and stuff. But, you got to learn somehow. And I think he pretty much learned. He may have been better behaved, all things considered, than I was at the time. Probably was. So, and I started drinking a lot more then, because I had less drugs available, and I started drinking. I started drinking. And I really believe I crossed the line into alcoholism at that time. I would drink. I called myself a bulimic alcoholic. So I would drink until I puked and then drink again. So that's why I called it bulimic alcoholism. And yeah, it's kind of disgusting, but I puked a lot, which I guess young drinkers frequently do. But, and you could go to the bars. I could go to the bars. And one bar near the base was clearly aimed at teen drinkers from the base. They didn't get far. Most of the students did not go far into Japan, but they managed to stray far enough to go to this bar so they could buy drinks. And the bartender, a middle-aged woman, she knew who her audience was, because all the drinks were mixed with soda pop. So, for example, if I asked for a screwdriver, she wouldn't put orange juice in it like they did in the States. She would put orange soda. So whatever you asked for, you would get that kind of alcohol mixed with some kind of soda drink, sugary soda-ish drink, which wasn't necessarily what I most wanted, but it was what I got, so I drank it. So she was smart. That was smart. Anyway, the economy was booming. People had money. People were spending it. They were pretty happy. They worked, they worked themselves to death and then went out and partied and drank. And that was the problem, the pattern. They worked long hours, and then they went out and partied with their work friends. Yeah, and they didn't get a lot of sleep, so they'd fall asleep on the subway trains. And the thing is, well, Tokyo was a very big, very fast city, and it was easy for me to get to by subway. I learned pretty quickly that I could never get lost on the Japanese subway, which meant that I did get lost on the Japanese subway. But it didn't matter because I would just tell as long as I knew the Japanese word for where I was trying to get to, I would tell it to them, and they would escort me like all either to the right train, or maybe all the way back to the gates of the army base. They were so polite, and of course I wasn't, but they indulged me. I had both the youth card and the gaijin card, as they call it. They know that no white foreigner can ever live up, even the ones who've been there for a long time and really try, can ever really follow the Japanese codes of what's good manners. So they give you what's called the gaijin card, and some people push it too far. I'm sure I did, but I didn't know any of them for long enough for them to really realize that, but I definitely pushed it. Yes. When I met another friend, okay, so I called this, I used the phrase cheap tricks in Japan for two reasons. One is that towards the beginning of my stay there, the band Cheap Tricks played at Budokan in Japan. I got to see part of that show on TV, but not not live. I mean, I wasn't a big fan anyway. They were not punk. They were not as edgy as I was. But in Japan, they were huge, especially with the girls. So in retrospect, I'm thinking, damn, I should have gone to the Budokan, maybe not even bought a ticket, maybe just stood in the line. And then when I got to where I was supposed to pay, leave and stand in the line again and maybe, have some fun with the girls. But more importantly, even if I didn't show up before the show, I should show up in time for after the show, because they had been in the show, those Japanese girls, and they were, they were attracted to white guys, or they wouldn't have gone. And they were even more so after they came out of the show. But I was not thinking strategically like that back then. So, the thing is, there was so much to do in Tokyo, and my mom managed to tap in through the science fiction writers circle and meet science fiction writers there and go, writing workshops and so on. But as for me, well, I definitely went a lot further than most of the other kids there, because most of them did not want to be in Japan, did not like Japanese people or Japanese culture, which they knew almost nothing about. They didn't pay it. They talked out loud through the one class in the high school that taught conversational Japanese, which is a shame because I actually had an interest in learning it since I was there. I knew almost none. But they never strayed very far. One teacher said their idea of a vacation is to go from the Army base to the Navy base, which I did, but that was not my idea of a big adventure for me. I went into the real Japan. And I took the subway to Tokyo and back. But the problem was, remember, there was no internet back then, none. And there was no me being able to speak the language. I knew almost no Japanese. I read almost no Japanese, and so I would arrive and I would wind up doing different things. One time I got coffee at a jazz bar, and it was more expensive than what the menu had led me to believe. So they told me that I only had to pay what I had gathered from what the menu said that one time, but the next time I'd have to pay the full amount. So I agreed. I went to a hot tub, an onsen place, not a hot spring, but a hot tub place. And Japanese hot tubs were clothing optional. And they were basically co-ed. I'm not sure if this one was. The ones in the countryside were definitely co-ed, but the majority of people who went were elderly, so you might not get the voyeuristic experience you were looking for, but they would be looking at you. Or so I read. I don't remember if that's true or not. Anyhow, it was clothing optional, so I took my clothes off. What I didn't realize was that when you left the room and went into the hot spring, you went into the hallway where you paid and did all that stuff. It was no longer clothing optional. So I went naked into the hallway, out of the room into the hallway, and which I guess was just about as taboo as walking down the street naked, but they knew I didn't know that. So one woman just started laughing hysterically, which was, an embarrassed laugh. It was basically the Japanese way of communicating that something was going on that wasn't really supposed to be going on. And then the guy said, "You're not supposed to be naked out of the room." And I was like, "Oh, okay, I'm sorry." And went back in and, dried off and put my clothes on and paid. So that was one thing. I went to a porno shop. I found a porno shop in Shinjuku. So my mother and stepfather, sorry, everybody. My chair just broke. Okay, you got to see in real life me dealing with my chair. So there was some drama in real time. My chair broke and I fell on the floor, but didn't get injured. Okay, so where was I? Yeah, my parents said my mother and stepfather who were there said, go to Shinjuku. It's very stimulating. And I went, and there were these huge, neon billboards all over the place, like Vegas, but more so. So, that was fun, but then it didn't stay interesting for that long. But it was kind of a part of town where some of the maybe more in underground scenes. So I went into a record store. I did see a record by the Sex Pistols, which impressed me. And I did see, I saw various, young teenagers dressed in like rockabilly style, leather jackets and short, slick back hair and that sort of thing. One of us went to the high school and he was full Japanese. He was considered very cool. I guess he was. Yes. I went to okay. Sorry, I know I'm deliberately being suspenseful here. So vending machines. So I had been a few months earlier, I'd been in Belize, and then I'd been in the Sausalito houseboats, which were in the USA, but let's face it, it was still pretty darn primitive. The majority of people did not have indoor plumbing. They would poop. There was a public shower house, and they would poop on a toilet that just fell directly into the bay. So it wasn't hard for me to get used to that because when I was in Belize, they had the outdoor, so it made it easier to get used to Belize. It was a longer walk, but there were basically these privies where you would park your butt over the bay and poop directly into the bay. I remember that from my early childhood where I did that and I saw catfish eating it, which was very memorable for a 4-year-old. Anyway, so instead of pooping in the Bay of Honduras, I was pooping in the San Francisco Bay. Not that different. And so what I'm getting at is even though the USA seemed overwhelmingly high tech, and I'll give you an example just to flash back a little. So when I was in Sausalito, I was in Mill Valley in a high school, and I smoked a joint. I was like, I was all like, oh, this is nothing. The weed in Belize is much stronger, which it was. Yeah, it was. But regardless, it was. And then I wanted to find a place to get off. But, I got one of my anxieties that I sometimes got when I smoked weed. This was already starting to happen. Early onset cannabis dysphoria, I would say. And so I tried to find a place to be in the woods. It'd be basic. And, in Punta Gorda, it was very easy. It was basically not a village, but really a small town surrounded by the bay and the jungle. So I could just go down to the beach and there'd be palm trees and I could just, chill by myself and get over my anxiety if I had it, which sometimes I did. So here I could not do that. I tried to, and I was in somebody's yard. I always found myself in somebody's yard. So that made me anxious. Now I know that Marin County has pretty much one of the most forested counties, especially being next to basically a suburb of San Francisco, a city, a real city. They fought to have a huge amount of green space, and later I hiked in it. But yeah, it wasn't quite as close. You had to either take the bus or walk to get to it. So for me, this was kind of overwhelming. So flash forward to Japan again. It was high tech. It was much more population density, so much so that it seemed like low population density when I got back to California. It was higher population density and it was higher tech. And some examples, like in those days, like the US, they would have some electric doors, like maybe in the supermarket, but they wouldn't have one in every little shop. Japan had them in every little shop. In Japan, there weren't really video games yet, except for Pong, the crudest one of all, which is basically like a pinball game. Very crude. You move and you move your paddles and these little ball goes back and forth. But in Japan, they had some of the ones that would start showing up in the USA in the early 1980s, like I don't know about Space Invaders. Space Invaders did. I don't know about Pac-Man, but space, that kind of thing. The ones you put not a quarter, but you put some yen in and got to play a game. And there were the big neon signs and the really quite efficient subway, more efficient than most U.S. transportation, maybe anywhere at the time, or still, despite how crowded it got. So, yeah. And so, one other aspect which indicated how more high-tech it already was the vending machine situation. Now, it wasn't uncommon on a street corner to see 3 vending machines side by side. One served you cold coffee. One served you warm sake, alcohol, generally drank hot and warm, not always, but generally. And the third served you a porno magazine. So I heard that some guys would go out late at night where no one could see them, get one of each, and go back to their apartment and have their own little private party, which is, I can believe that's understandable, you know. Right there, people use it. So the thing about pornography, though, is that there was a whole thing, and I saw it in the theater too, underpants porn. And I think they created an entire fetish because it was illegal to show genitals, to show pubic. Specifically, it was illegal to show pubic hair, and also what they call, Hustler magazine called pink, which is, I think you can figure out what it is. Anyway, you could not show that stuff in a magazine or in a movie. So the net result was that the women kept their underwear on. And I was 16, and that was good enough for me. Somebody else looked at it when I brought one back and said, Japanese men must be very easily surprised. Well, I mean, very easily aroused. And it's like, well, so are teenage boys. So it was a match. And then I went into a porno shop in Shinjuku. And a couple of things surprised me. One is, it's kind of ironic because, of course, there was panty porn as elsewhere. But also, they got around the laws banning the showing of pubic hair by selling pictures of naked children. Not teenagers, I'm talking about children. Now, there was no sex in them. These were basically just pictures taken from Western nudist magazines, like the kind that they had in nudist camps. They would take pictures. There would be children in them. That was not illegal. Or if it was, nobody cared at the time, because it was not considered porn in the U.S. and no children were harmed in the making of those magazines. But in the USA, even in porn shops, even in the back where the really raunchy stuff was, I eventually figured out, even there, you would have not seen pictures of anybody that was obviously a minor or that was, labeled as a minor. There might have been some under the counter. I don't know. I didn't ask. They wouldn't admit it. Who knows? But you would not find it on display. So this is this weird thing where this combination, and the reason for that law, here's the reason. When Japan surrendered to the United States at the end of World War II, the United States Army, under the leadership of General Douglas MacArthur, took control. And in that general chaos of that transitional period, so I've heard and read, MacArthur was generally in charge of drafting the new Constitution. Later, of course, Japan became autonomous, and they, I guess, probably didn't keep all of it, made their own changes, but they kept a lot of it. And one of it, because this was 1945, so General MacArthur wrote a law saying that depiction of full frontal nudity, as described, pubes and so on, was against the law. And that law it was still there in the 1920s and beyond. They don't exactly have it the same now, but they do have other censorship laws. And if you care what they are, you can look it up for yourself. I'm not going to tell you. But What I'm saying is there was this combination of them not allowing things that would be allowed in the United States with them allowing things that were totally not allowed in the United States. There was this kind of a paradox. My stepfather said that it, Japan in the 1970s was like a combination of the United States in the 1950s. Wait, no, he said 1950s, the 1950s, and the 2050s rolled into one. So, in some areas they were kind of conservative. In other areas, they were really conservative. And in other areas, they were really more technologically ahead of us. Yeah. Seems to be okay. There was a little tech warning. Okay, continuing. Yeah, I didn't really know how to dress like a real punk yet anyway, and they wouldn't have known the difference. But just to show you where their tastes in music were at. So there was a movie theater which only showed, safe for work movies like American Graffiti. I don't even know if they showed anything that wasn't G-rated. Very likely not. But they showed Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club, the movie. And the movie, by this time, when that movie was made in the mid-1970s, the Beatles had lost the rights to a lot of their own songs. They had lost it. A lot of this had to do with actually Michael Jackson, I think, bought them out. He was investing. That was part of how he got rich. He invested not only in his own music but other people. But at any rate, so they could not decide what was done with their music. So what was done was that all of these songs on the original Sgt. Pepper's Lonely House House Club Band, which was very good music by any reasonable standards, was sang by the Bee Gees. The Bee Gees, which to me was like the most insufferable pop drivel. I have friends that liked it, mostly friends who were women, mainstream women, who were then teenagers at the time, and who like it, and that's fine. Whatever you listen to and you liked as a teen, you're going to like forever. That's just the way it is. So, but I didn't. And okay, so they took this. They had the Bee Gees singing Sgt. Pepper's House Club to a story that they wrote themselves that was pure candy coated schmaltz, which is a Yiddish term for just corny. Like you take like a piece of fat, piece of bacon, and you roll it in sugar, and that's what the movie was. But I had a friend in that high school who said she liked the Bee Gees music better than the Sgt. Pepper version. I know I'm being a snob here, but I'm going to do that anyway. They did not know that in sometime around the early 2000s, the original rights to the Sgt. Pepper album, the Beatles version, sold for $1 billion. I think it was to Apple. $1 billion, literally $1 billion. Whereas the Bee Gees movie wound up being shown at midnight on a cable channel on a program called Midnight Snack. It was shown at midnight, and it was basically like a so bad it's funny version. So what I'm saying is history was not kind to their verdict. And mine were better, and I had better taste. Damn it. Okay. But the big problem was no internet, no knowledge of the Japanese language to speak of. There were super cool things going on, like a punk scene in Tokyo that I had no idea about. But how would I have found them? How would I have found it? How? And if I had it to do over, one thing I would do was get a couple of guidebooks. Now, of course, at the time, I thought guidebooks were bourgeois because I had spent a year in Belize and Guatemala, never had a guidebook, but of course I didn't need one because I lived with the local people, and Belize spoke a form of English, which I picked up on pretty quickly. And Guatemala spoke, most of it spoke at least a little bit they spoke Spanish. No, most of them spoke Spanish, except in the really Mayan areas. And I knew a little bit and was able to improve very quickly because I had taken it in school and such. Got D's in it, but nevertheless, it was stored in my memory bank. So I was able to just get around in Belize and Guatemala on my own or with the help of other people in a way that I really couldn't do in Japan. So if I had it to do over again, I would put aside my snobbishness and get a couple of guidebooks. At least it would have given me some place to start as far as knowing where to go and what to see that was written in English. Now, my parents had my birth father had a friend living in Japan, in Tenri City, which was fairly near Kyoto. My father was friends with members of the Tenrikyo religion. He was a member of the Tenrikyo religion. He had both Japanese and Caucasian friends in this mostly Japanese religion. And this couple was a Caucasian woman with a Japanese wife, and they were both followers of Tenrikyo as well. I had been to Tenri City before, and I had been to Tenrikyo service, so this wasn't anything new to me. And I visited her, I don't know, a week or something. And it was pretty cool. She was pretty bored there. Well, she had a baby, so that limited it. And Japanese culture was not particularly kind to daughter-in-laws traditionally. They were kind of low on the family totem pole compared to parents-in-law, husbands, even older women, maybe a little bit above their children. According to Confucian ethics, well, I won't get into that, but yeah. So she watched a lot of TV is what I'm getting at. And for me, that wasn't so bad because I watched it with her and it was kind of fun because I don't know, I didn't watch as much TV. I don't even know if I had my own TV. I think there was a TV in the house, but I might not have had my own, which is just as well, or I would have watched too much of it. But there was, I got to, first of all, be exposed to a little more of the language, and secondly, be exposed to their pop culture. It was just as schmaltzy pop, but it was Japanese, so it was exotic, so I liked it. One of them was a female singer named Momoi, which means peach. Okay. There were cartoons, of course. Japanese cartoons were not yet called anime. And if you don't know, the word anime is derived from the English word animation, went to Japan where it was shortened and Japanified to anime, and then traveled back to the USA under the name of anime, which just meant Japanese animation. and some stuff made in the US that was in the style of Japanese animation later. So there was that. And then there was this singer who went, his name was Julie. He was a man. Obviously, the name is a little androgynous. He had shoulder length hair and no facial hair. But it was, it was a Western name, so not everyone might have gotten that Julie was a woman's name usually. But he did this song about Humphrey Bogart, and he would sing "Bogey, Bogey," and then he would take a shot of Suntory whiskey, Japanese whiskey, and then he would spit it up in the air. That was his trademark signature move. Okay. I was into spitting alcohol and spitting stuff out, and a little bit punk rock, so I kind of like that. And she also took me to Tokyo. I mean, not Tokyo. So, right, they thought, somehow my parents thought that I had lost the instructions, but I hadn't. I hadn't lost the instructions on how to get the train to Kyoto, or maybe to Tenri City. And in any case, I knew how to get around, which was usually asking people. So I got there fine. And there had been a false alarm. I told them, I guess I called them and said, no, I got here fine. And so she took me to Kyoto, which I had also been to before. We went, so in addition to managing to get beer and Japanese coffee, Japanese tea, Japanese whiskey, and Japanese beer were all high quality and later became very expensive. I think at least the whiskey did. They were very good. And I was not abstinent from any of those things at the time. So, of course, I liked the speedball effect of the beer and the coffee. And she took me to some kind of a garden. I remember that. And there was a gardening supply store. And they sold different kinds of seeds for home gardeners. One of them was Heavenly Blue Morning Glory seeds. I was like, aha, that one is a psychedelic. So I bought them, but there were only 3. Now, I know now that you need to eat a lot of them to really trip, and probably that amount will make you sick also. So you should tinker in alcohol. I never took more than 15 at a time. But anyway, which still didn't get me that high. But, it gave me a slight buzz, not noticeable to anyone else, I think. And so that was my big trip to Tenri City and Kyoto. But I'd been to Kyoto before, and it is a beautiful and very historically significant city. Lots of old temples. I saw more of them when I went when I was 13, I think, more of it than I did when I was 16. And of course, when I went back to high school, I told the other students, I just went to Tenri City and Kyoto. I went on this vacation. And one of the girls said, did you get laid? And I said, no. And she said, well, did you get high? And I said, no, because those 3 Morning Glory seeds didn't really count. And she said, well, then your trip was wasted, which just shows this level of sophistication we're talking about here. They would say things like, I don't care what the gooks think. And so, sorry to use the term, but that's what they said. And then one of them eventually said, well, it would be fun if we had more money and could go to the discos. Of course, I wasn't into discos, so I didn't care about that. Although I might have had some fun experiences there. In Japan, in the US, I tried it and I totally didn't. I'm not a dancer. And the kinds of dances I did enjoy were like hippie dancing and punk dancing, which is basically just jump up and down and smash into people. So in other words, stuff that required no skill whatsoever. That's what I liked. And no social skills either, because you didn't have to ask anybody to dance or figure out how long you're supposed to dance with somebody and move on to someone else. None of that. Because you just dance with everybody and nobody, you know. And so, right. So now we're getting to, okay. So on one occasion, my stepfather gave me a tablet of dexedrine. And it was orange. I think it was a pretty high dose. Anyway, I crushed it up and sniffed a couple of, maybe a little bit. And then I went out, walked off base, and, there were things that were interesting. For example, the fruit, like the apples, they were expensive, but they were huge and they tasted great. They were like essence of apple juice, of apple flavor, not apple juice, but apple. Some of the fruit was really good, is what I'm saying. And well worth the extra money. Probably even pound for pound, but definitely quality wise, they were big. So anyway, I walked off the base and enjoyed it and saw some stuff and came home and went to sleep. And the next day was a school day. So I got up and I sniffed the rest of it, of course. And I went to school. And then I was doing all right until I think I was still buzzed until the afternoon when it started wearing off. And that was my least popular period because it was math class. And I've always been bad at math, always. Well, I managed to be okay at arithmetic if I could do it slowly at my own speed, but I could never do it at the speed I was supposed to do it. I could never do rote memorization and so on and so on. So here I am. I guess this is basically junior high, not junior high, but junior in high school level that I was supposed to be on, even though I hadn't attended nearly that much high school. I think it was the third semester, actually. Okay, that is junior. Maybe. No, see how bad I am at knowing how. Yeah, I think I was supposed to be a junior, even though I had only done a couple of semesters before that I completed. I should have basically really been a sophomore. But I got an A in creative writing because I was the only one who really even attempted to really write a story, even though my handwriting and spelling was awful. And the story was not a masterpiece. I was no Rimbaud, let's face it, who was obviously a genius at poetry at 15. I wasn't him. I thought I was, but I wasn't. So anyway, the point I'm getting at is that I was bad at math and not up to grade and not even up to probably the grade I was supposed to have been in. Because I lost it around, I really lost the plot around sixth grade, I think, when they started doing multiplication and division of fractions. And that became, I did have some, I was never full on dyslexic in the sense that it never interfered with my ability to read. It did affect my spelling, and sometimes I reverse letters or either reverse the shape of the letter or reverse the order of the letter. I realized later I did that sometimes. But anyway, when it came to math, because numbers are all the same to me anyway, like a train looks different than a boat, but a 10 doesn't look all that different from a 100 to me. I know that there's an extra digit and I can tell the difference. But if you're doing a whole lot of them and multiplying them and dividing them, I can't keep up. Or especially if you're multiplying. I did learn to multiply and divide, and percentages and and decimals, but multiplying and dividing fractions, no. So all of this is a very long-winded way of getting to the fact that I did not do my math homework. And the teacher said I had to do the teacher came up to me and said, you are not going home until you finish that math homework. He was very army about it. What he did not realize, but I did, was that it would have been impossible for me to do that. I mean, he wasn't offering to tutor me. I simply was incapable of doing that homework. And I kind of imagined us sitting there 20 years later, picking lice out of our long beards, still waiting in that classroom and pooping and peeing in the corner until I managed to get that math homework done, which I still wouldn't have been able to do because he wasn't really teaching me. So instead of saying that, which, maybe he probably would have thought I was being smart ass, even though it was true. But instead of that, he said, you're not leaving till you finish that math class. And and I said, well, it would be interesting to see you try and stop me. Whoa! Total insubordination in the ranks, right? So, Mr. Jones was his name, and I can say that. I don't remember his first name. He took me immediately to the principal's office. But in the principal's office, and there were a couple of girls that I knew in high school that were sitting there for whatever reason, waiting. And I managed to actually look like the more mature person there because I kept quiet. And he just was screaming and yelling and losing his stuff all over the place. And those girls who were my classmates heard it. And they loved it. They loved it. Of course they did. It was only after he left that I started betraying the fact that I wasn't so tightly wound up anyway, because I was crashing. And I tried to make some coffee, but it wasn't instant. It was French roast. And I tried to, it was like it was something. It wasn't instant. And I put it in a cup with hot water and it didn't dissolve, but I tried to drink it anyway. And then he was looking at me like, whoa, are you okay, man? But anyway, I got out and I talked to the girls, obviously, and they had heard. And now I had some respect because I had made a teacher lose his shite. And I told them, they hadn't been in the class. I told them what had led up to it. And one of them said, Mr. Jones does not like to be cut. And one of the girls actually now seemed to be kind of attracted to me because there was some kind of Sadie Hawkins dance coming up where the girls were supposed to answer the guys. They were supposed to ask the guys, obviously. So she said, oh, there's a dance coming up. And I was wondering, and I was waiting for her to finish this. She said, well, I was wondering, and I knew what she wanted to say. And then she said, oh, never mind. She lost the nerve. And I didn't help any. The reason I didn't really say is because I didn't really date, they may have thought it was a date, but it never turned into one, really. I didn't date girls in high school or junior high school. I always went outside of that system, which I had not yet figured out how to do in Japan, although I would. And and her friend was sitting there, and the reason I wasn't into it, I'm sure I've said this before, but was because I did not like the whole fishbowl environment where they said, oh, so-and-so, Ethan is going with so-and-so, and she's ugly, or she's not ugly and whatever it would be. I didn't want to be observed and commented on the way you are in K through 12, whatever you do. So I didn't ask her to the Sadie Hawkins dance, and I'm a shite dancer. I did wind up going to one school dance with another girl, half Asian and cute, and I got to sort of rub against her. So I enjoyed that, but I didn't go to another one there. I didn't care for them. Definitely didn't go to prom. Oy, Gavel. No way. Wasn't in high school at all for the junior or senior prom. So I met a couple of other partiers, and they were into drinking and smoking weed and whatnot. And so I went out with one of them. Maybe she thought it was a date. She found out it wasn't pretty soon. But we got high on weed, I believe. And then I don't know if it was I think it wasn't the same night. But then another night, this time I had stolen a codeine from my parents. So I wasn't super high, but it kicked in. And we went to this club, which was what I was looking for. This was a club where instead of buying drinks, you would kind of get a whole couch and a table and sit with your friends. And and you would buy a whole bottle of whiskey. No one came up and said, would you like another drink? You went up and got a whole bottle of Suntory whiskey. So, not much of a thing for moderation, was it? I mean, I got kind of drunk. And then there were these young Japanese people who came in. And one of the girls that was with me, the one who'd invited me, said, oh, look at them. They think they're cool, but they're not down to earth. And that's what it's really all about. They're not down to earth. And I said, no, they're on the same team as us. They're just like us. They just want to go out and party and like we do. And I kind of did think of people in teams somewhat in terms of how their age and their partiness and such like. And anyway, she said, well, that's how I think. That's what I think. And then and so there was her, me, another girl. There was this real cute girl, also from the Army Base Hospital. And then there were a couple, there was at least one straight up Army guys, young men who are actually in the Army, not just Army brats like the rest of us. And I really didn't talk to them. No, in particular. I didn't talk to one, whoever they were or he was. So anyway, they say, and this is mostly garbage, what they say online, advice about what appeals to women, but there may be a grain of truth to it. There are two kinds of guys that women find attractive. One is the dominant, alpha guy. I was really never that guy. I might have wanted to be, I may have pretended to be, I may have thought I was, but I was never really the guy in charge, It's too complicated and too much work and requires too many social skills. But the other one, which some people are calling the Sigma male, although naming people after Greek letters is absolute garbage, by the way, if you didn't already know that. But he's also called the interloper. And he is the one with the nerve to approach a group of strangers and just try to worm his way in. And the response will either be hostile, or it will be positive. And the girls will inspire his nerve, his courage. his baldiness, essentially, his chutzpah. So the thing is that only a few months earlier, I had been in Belize and Guatemala. I'd been around Mayans, Garifunas, Belizean Creoles, Spanish people. Garifuna is this Black Native American hybrid culture. I've talked about that a lot already. So anyway, the bottom line is I was not afraid or considered it, or I wasn't afraid to talk to people from another culture, nor did I think that I was really superior to people from another culture like they did, because they had learned it from their family and from army. I have a theory about that. I think that their families are basically taught to think of themselves as superior to the people they're around, even during peacetime, because they really don't want the members of the military or their children, really, to go native. They don't want them to start identifying with the local people. And they reinforce. I mean, some soldiers obviously will come back with foreign wives. That's not really the same thing. They, men and women, young men, young women, single guys, and stuff like that happens. But generally speaking, but they don't become part of the culture, really, and that's a different thing. So that's the culture their parents are cultured in, and the teenagers pick it up. Whereas I was fully willing to go native, and so I did. I found this one Japanese woman. I believe she was 19. I was 16. That kind of thing never mattered back then. Really, nowhere that I went did that kind of thing matter very much, like small age differences like that, or even larger ones. So the point is, so then I made out with her very heavily. I won't get into details, but I did. And my army friends saw me. And I guess that was, if she hadn't already realized it before, that was when she realized I did not see the situation as me going on a date with her. Luckily, she wound up making out with one of the army guys, so I don't feel too bad. I don't know how much she really gave a fuck about me, or whether she basically thought of me as just a party buddy and a drinking buddy, because she and the other high school girls were also very heavy drinkers, as I was. We were all, although I did not yet realize it, we were teenage alcoholics. I remember one time thinking, I have a thirst, and it's not for water. It's a thirst specifically for alcohol. I'll bet that's how alcoholics must feel. Well, I was right. And but what I didn't know was the reason that I knew how alcoholics must feel is because I had already crossed the line and become one. Yeah. So anyway, after severely making out and fondling this one young woman and getting her contact information, I wound up going to Tokyo with some other young Japanese people in the group. And we went in a bar. Now, similarly to how things are in in the San Francisco Bay Area, was like how they were in Tokyo at the time, which was that the subway basically stopped running around midnight. But the difference was that the bars did not close at 2 p.m. In Tokyo, it was like New York. The bars stayed open all night and continued to serve drinks. So one thing they did in Japan that they did not do in the US was that they served snacks. And I'm not talking about salty pretzels and peanuts and, you know, stuff that's really just designed to make you more thirsty. So you'll order more drinks which contain alcohol or something else, and or something else that dehydrates you, which will only make you more thirsty, like caffeine, sugar, carbonation, etc. All that stuff doesn't hydrate you much. It makes you more thirsty. No, it wasn't that. They were serving real snacks. What am I thinking? Like baby corn, and I don't remember exactly. And this was good. And this enabled the all-night crowd who were out beyond the last subway to continue staying there and drinking because they could also eat a reasonable amount without passing out and getting sick. And so this was truly one of my triumphant evenings. One of the young women, not the same one, said, "You are very handsome." And I said, "You are very beautiful." And she came up and kissed me on the lips. And I took it just a little bit further than that, which apparently was not what she was looking for. So she withdrew. And somewhere during the night, I did the same thing with a second woman. So I did that with 3 women in that night. So yay me. Yay 16-year-old me. But yeah, the unfortunate part, my father had a saying, on the last night, the girls always smile. And what he meant was somehow the women really only start seeming to warm up to you wherever you are, just when you're about to leave. And sadly, that was the case in this case. And so I did, besides impressing my Army base high school friends again, I also got the first young woman's contact information, and I figured out how to get to her place. And there were a couple of amusing things. One was she asked me if I'm blonde. And as you can see, basically the same color except for the bit that's white. I am not blonde. I have dark brown hair. But she was so used to only seeing East Asian hair that I looked blonde to her. So, a second thing is, again, I think she was trying to appeal to my Western taste. So I didn't mention it. She served me pasta, like white pasta with mayonnaise. So I'm not crazy about white flour pasta, and I really don't like mayonnaise. But I knew she had done it for my benefit. And so I, of course, was smart enough to not mention that I didn't really like it and to eat all that had been served to me. And then I started explaining to her that, like, I was going to leave, like, maybe the next day. I don't remember exactly, or a couple of days. I was going to leave Japan, and she understood that. She had enough English to get that idea. And then, magically, there was another young woman that was there that lived with her. The other young woman, somehow, I guess there was another room. She left the room. And so me and her were able to have an experience. The first, but not the last experience I would have with a Japanese woman, but the last one I would have in Japan. And so after that, she walked me back to the subway, and I distinctly remember she didn't put her bra back on. It had been on before. She didn't put it back on. And, I knew the Japanese kind of conservative modesty culture outside of hot tubs and sex, obviously. So that kind of struck me. That was kind of hot for me. And then I went out to my parents' place, back to my parents' place on the Army base. And then not long after that, I went back to California. Now, my parents had bought me from the PX a very large bottle of, I believe it was 151 rum, and a very large bottle of Suntory absinthe, and I guess some condoms. Oh, that's another example of that weird um, authoritarian yet in some ways permissive. The law in Japan is condoms are that it was the case at the time, and it remained so for a long time, at least into the 90s. I don't know what's the case now. Condoms were legal and advertised openly, and abortions were legal and not all that looked down upon. You know, obviously they do it discreetly. There's actually a Buddhist ritual that women who have had abortions participate in, some kind of, I don't know, to absolve them of guilt for taking what some people obviously would consider a life. And Buddhism does teach not to take a life, but that never stopped the Japanese military during World War II. So, you know, there clearly were exceptions. Anyway, what am I getting at? Oh, yes, my parents had bought me a box of condoms, which was the only thing they got me out of those three things that was appropriate. So I repaid the woman who had taken me to that club by giving her, I still had most of the rum, most of the absinthe, all of the condoms, didn't use any of them. And I gave them to her in a paper bag. And the next time she saw me, she was like, obviously she was grateful for the alcohol because she was already an alcoholic. But she said, "Why did you give me those condoms?" And I was like, "I don't know. Come to think of it, I don't know either, because I could have took them back to me, but it just didn't cross my mind." This was the 70s, people. Although in Japan, I could have easily, if I had remained in Japan much longer, I could have easily gotten a girl knocked up if I hadn't used them because of why I just mentioned. So then I flew back to California, what they call Space A. And this was a very cheap way it was a cheap way for people who are affiliated with the Army and probably the other military, but I don't know, to travel. And the idea was, well, it wasn't so cheap for me because I only wanted to go to the military base in or near San Francisco. But if you were open to where you wanted to go, and my mom did this, she said, "You don't know where you're going to go, so you pack some tropical clothing, you pack some warmer clothing, and if you're willing to get on the first flight to anywhere, you can get a really cheap vacation. The airfare is really cheap. So you might wind up in the Philippines or maybe Korea or maybe Thailand." And I should have took more. I really should have stayed longer. I should have stayed much longer. I probably should have stayed till I was 18 and started working as a for real English teacher before, the bubble burst. And because when I went there, the bubble was strong. And one of the perks was all the companies were encouraging their workers to learn English. So even I got to make some money by tutoring English as a second language, or what they call conversational English, which basically means you help them and just by talking to them in English. And some people, they will come up to you and want to talk to you. And later you will realize that really they just want someone to practice their English with. So, maybe they're just exploiting you a little bit, but it's not as bad as in poor countries where they're really just trying to extract money and material things out of you one way or another. So, yeah, regardless of the fact that, or probably because of the fact that I was headed for just one destination, I sat in the airport for a long time. And when I had fortunately, I had a couple of Army base high school friends who were in there with me. So, at least I had people to talk to. And I knew that you could easily exchange paper money when you get back, but you could not exchange coins. Or, well, later I learned you could, but you'd get half value from them. But I thought you couldn't. And what I knew later realized I should have tried to turn my coins into paper money, but I didn't think of that. So one of the guys who was just hanging out in the airport, maybe with another friend, but he wasn't leaving, I gave him all my coins I had in my pocket, which was a fair amount. So, I was generous as long as it was stuff I wasn't planning to use anyway. I don't know if I could have. Very likely I could not have imported the alcohol back into the U.S. Maybe I could have. I don't know. And so my last experience with Japan was in an airport. And then I got on the plane, and it was an Army plane. And it was very minimalistic. It had no windows, and it had like kind of a sliding metal chair, not a super comfortable chair. And your meal was, in those days, you got decent meals on long flights usually. You don't anymore. You get stuff that's like packaged snack food, and you still have to pay for it. You got a decent meal in those days, but this time you didn't. You basically just got an okay meal, but it was like a beef patty with maybe a bun or something like that. Anyway, minimalistic flying, but it was all right. It didn't bother me too. I was young. I could go on long flights, minimalist or not. It wasn't as bad as now when you fly coach and get squished in with other people. You may get a window that you can possibly look through depending on which seat you get. It was still better than that. But to me at the time, it seemed very minimalistic. So anyway, I landed back in California at I don't exactly remember where, but it was either in or near, probably in. There was an Army base there, so it was probably in San Francisco. And then I was able to get a bus back to where I was planning to go again. I had a friend. I had stayed with her before, but I was able to stay with her again. I just showed up and she put me up, which was very nice of her. She did give me some food and I didn't pay for it. To be fair, my parents, at this point, my mother and stepfather they were still in Japan. They were in Japan for years afterwards, as was my brother. And my father had moved on. I think he was already teaching at the University of El Paso, Texas, which I briefly went there with him later, much later. No, he wasn't. He was teaching me at the university. He was teaching creative writing as a professional on site because he was a published writer of fantasy and science fiction, and quite a lot of it. He had no college degrees himself. And he was able to get these short-term jobs at and so basically, before I went to Belize, I had been offered the choice: go to Belize with this family that they thought they knew, even though it was so different than what my father had known, or go stay with or stay in Sausalito with your mother and stepfather. I guess that would have been tolerated, though not encouraged. Or go with my father to the University of Virginia. Now, I asked one woman what her experiences, what her advice was. She'd been to both places, and she said, well, Virginia is beautiful this time of year. And the last time I was in Belize, I was praying to God I got out because I was raped 3 times in like a week or two. That was only in Belize City. Well, anyway, obviously, I chose Belize, which was the correct choice. But then I came back to California and then to Japan and then back to the California houseboats a third time. And this video is almost 2 hours long, so I'm going to try to post it and then try to put it somewhere. Now, the reason I've waited so long is that I somehow lost the ability to repost these videos on Facebook. And when I looked at my videos, they were like over 3 different channels, and I still couldn't find all of them. I hope they're all there. If not, I hope somebody saved them, can access them. Anyway, if not, well, at least I made them and somebody heard them. So I am going to now try to do some tech stuff. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for listening. See you next time. Adios. And how do you say it in Japanese? Sayonara. That's how. I learned a bit more later, but still not very much. Okay. Okay. End stream. End stream.